With most of the story points covered for the Ragnarok trailer, I decided to revisit to see if I can find any new details. I was surprised to see some new game mechanics as well as older mechanics making an appearance that I before overlooked. I aimed to identify and analyse how these mechanics could be used, overall from a gameplay perspective what the developers are likely focusing towards. If I miss out on certain points, it's only because there is a lot to mention. I aim to discuss the key points only. At the beginning of the trailer, fans were quick to point out Kratos was sharpening arrows, leading to speculations that as well as Atreus, Kratos would make use of a bow in the sequel, though I believe this to be unlikely. When I compared the arrows in the first scene to what was held in Atreus' pouch, I noticed the fletching colour was similar, in fact identical. Not to mention, introducing such a weapon would dampen Atreus' use. After all, in gameplay his primary task is to focus on further away targets and distract them. In the following scene we can briefly see Kratos reaching down to his sled, almost as if he is loading it. Could it be a longer journey we will need to transport items, as quests? There was another detail I noticed about the sled. Note how Kratos grasps the wooden bar which seems to activate it, not to mention Atreus seemed to brace immediately after as a result. He also didn't whip the wolves to start sledging. In game, it may be we have to activate the sled in such a manner, otherwise I could see traversal being a bit difficult if the sled is immediately activated upon setting foot. In the Svartalfheim part of the trailer, in the distance we can see Odin's Raven collectibles making a return. Moving on to the new enemy types which look to be inspired by the Ogre in 2018, notice how the larger enemy lets out a cry which appears to call his minions. I'll build upon what strategy we'll need to use to take them down later in the video. On the scene after, notice the minion spits a projectile at us. Judging from the form, it will likely be poisonous, leaving us with a poison status ailment, just like the poisonous Revenant, Wolf, and cursed Tatzelworm. This also reveals the battle strategy of this enemy, to distract and interrupt the father-son's attack from afar, while the larger beast does heavy damage. In the same scene, we can also see hidden areas making a return. The wooden board is breakable judging by the broken slab, though the hollow inside is more apparent in the scene before. Could we also use this to our advantage in this battle by isolating the larger enemy? And of course we can see a grappling mechanic, adding some depth to the vertical aspect of movement, as well as hooking and charging at enemies. In the same scene, I want to highlight an easily overlooked detail, the visual language. Notice how the pillar in the distance glows. In 2018, some interactable objects would appear more pronounced the further we got away from them, as a way to steer the player towards the progression route without immersion breaking static arrows. Though in this case the colour seems to have changed from yellow to white, likely as white stands out a little more than yellow. As for what the pillar represents is a mystery, but it may serve to elevate the father-son. Moving on to Atreus, notice the glowing melee attacks he performs. In 2018, Atreus had a vast emphasis on ranged attacks. That's not to say melee combat wasn't a thing, but it's likely there will be more of an emphasis this time around. Back to Kratos, this one is self-explanatory. He's seen performing a ground pound with the blades, with likely a wide radius damaging attack, once again showing how the developers are focusing on verticality. To conclude this scene, note how one of the minions is leaping to a ledge in the last few frames. This was likely the AI responding to Kratos getting too close, or that he did a lot of damage in a short amount of time. In the next scene, we can see a new enemy type who is likely part of Odin's army, the Einherjar, judging by the fact they are presumably guarding Tyr's Gate in this scene. Again, we see the visual language making an appearance. There's not much to comment on this other than it's an area to boost Atreus to reach areas like in 2018. Kratos then uses a similar startup animation from 2018, but this time the attack phase slams and launches the enemy as opposed to spinning in succession. Overall, I've noticed the developers focusing on verticality in both combat and movement, something 2018 didn't have as much, which is reminiscent of previous God of War games, though understandable due to the camera change. Progressing on, Kratos looks to be activating a runic attack that looks to have a long range area of effect. I can see this being used for enemies packed together. As for who this enemy is, likely another Einherjar. Judging by its slower movement speed, it will likely do more damage. Atreus then fires an arrow that launches the Draugr, while Kratos times his Leviathan axe throw. I can see the great crowd control potential of this move. In the same scene, to me this appears to be the axe's equivalent to what the blades did in a previous scene. Similarly, it launches the enemy into the air to then juggle them. Also, it's very easy to miss, but note Kratos' attack transitions into a very familiar pose. This is a follow-up attack returning from God of War 2018, mixing horizontal and vertical attack patterns. There isn't much to comment on this scene with the Dreki, other than Kratos looked to be performing a startup animation for a possible runic attack, only for it to be interrupted. On the enemy called the Stalker, who some people believed was a centaur, as the name suggests, they will likely follow us around before ambushing us. Here we can see it hooking onto Kratos. I have two theories on this. Either Kratos was too far, so attempted to reduce the distance by grabbing onto him, or this is the start of the battle when the Stalker ambushed the pair. Building back on the ogre-like creatures, not only are we shown a rectangular variation of the Guardian Shield, but also its use. Pay attention to how slamming the shield in this state launches the minions, while the larger enemy's attack is only interrupted. This variation will likely be used as another crowd control option. For the oval variation, the shield emits a spark upon deflecting. It may be the shield's purpose is to render an enemy with an electrocuted status ailment each time you counter their attack. In the background we can also see Atreus using a new runic summon, another effective crowd controller. This will especially be useful in battles when we are cornered or Kratos is vulnerable. Kratos then follows up by hooking an enemy and throwing them. Note this attack has the same startup animation as that of the cleave, but don't worry, the startup is much quicker this time. As shown in the trailer, this move will be perfect for throwing enemies off ledges and into other enemies to interrupt their attack, very reminiscent of this mechanic from 2018. Back to the blades. Similar to a previous scene, this move again serves to slam the enemy, but this time while they are already airborne. To conclude, let's discuss realm travelling. While it wasn't shown in the trailer, it's safe to say we won't be using Tyr's Temple. Not only are we missing a Bifrost, but even if we did have one, Odin has locked realm travel altogether. This is where Brok and Sindri's place may become the central hub for realm travelling. After playing the new Ratchet & Clank, I thought something similar may be implemented in Ragnarok, but since the game is on a larger scale and will be on both consoles, there are likely some technical capabilities the developers had to sacrifice. So with that said, I can see a very similar approach to how realm travel works in 2018, but with faster loading. But as always, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Do you have your own thoughts on how gameplay will work? I want to take the time to mention I've made a Patreon and Discord with other benefits. No, you don't need to join, but all support will go into improving the channel. I'll be creating a YouTube membership option very soon too, just waiting for badges and emotes to be created. I want to give a special thanks to Jiva for becoming my first member. Thank you for helping support the channel, it means a lot to me. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing, that would mean more than the 9 realms put together. As always, thank you for your time, take care.